welcome back. Today it is time for my very first reading wrap-up of the year, my January reading wrap-up. January was such a good reading month for me. I feel like I haven't had a great reading month in so long, and to be excited about books again, to be reading a ton and just be loving the books that I'm reading felt so good. I ended up reading 15 books in the month of January, and I haven't had that good of a reading month in probably a year. Like, it's been so long since I had a month where I just read a ton of books and loved them. So I'm really excited to be talking about all the books that I read in January. I thought because it's a new year and I like switching things up every once in a while that I would go back to doing some monthly reading stats. So like I said, I read 15 books in the month of January, which equaled a total of 5,054 pages, which is an average of about 163 pages a day, which is crazy, but it feels really good to have hit such a large number for the very first month of the year. I am under no delusion that it's going to continue this way. I'm sure that the reading is going to slow down at some point, but right now the train is moving and I'm on it. 3 of the books that I read this month were books that I reread, and 12 of them were books that were new to me. I read 9 of these books as audiobooks, 3 of them as ebooks, and then 3 of them physically, which is good. In terms of genre, I read 3 contemporary, 5 sci-fi fantasy, 2 collections of short stories, 1 nonfiction book, 2 historical fiction, and then I read 2 graphic novels, which were contemporary, so I guess they kind of fit in both categories. And if you watched my goals video, you'll know that one of my goals this year is to have my books balance every month. So the amount of books that I physically read off of my TBR, I want to be equal to or more than the amount of books that I bring onto my physical TBR. So I thought I would show you those now in the stats section. One of the books I read this month was an ARC, and like I said, 3 of them were rereads, and then 4 of them were from the library. So 7 of the books that I read this month were off of my already owned physical TBR, which is great. I'm so happy. 7 books for the first month of the year is fantastic. And as for the books that came onto my TBR, just 1. So obviously the book's balanced. They more than balanced. I'm very happy. I only bought 1 book this month, and actually I didn't even buy this book. Cole bought it for me as a gift, so I didn't actually spend any money this month on books, which I feel great about. So with all of that out of the way, let's actually get to talking about the books that I read in the month of January. And I thought instead of doing this like in order of least to most favorite or in the order that I read them, I would split it up into categories this month, so like different types of books that I read, whether it be genre or for certain projects or whatever. So it's gonna be a little bit all over the place. This is not the order that I read these books, but I'm excited to talk to you about them nonetheless. So first up, I thought I would talk about the 3 books that I reread in January. If you watched my goals video, which if you haven't watched it, I'll leave it linked down below and maybe in the little eye if I can remember. One of my goals this year is to reread some books that I've previously considered favorite books and just kind of determine whether or not they are in fact favorite books, if they hold up on a second reading or third reading or whatever it may be. So I did end up rereading a couple of books this month, 2 off of my list of 36 and then 1 just because I was in the mood to read it. So starting off, just right off the bat, I decided to reread Station 11 in January, which is the book that for a very long time I have considered my favorite book of all time. It's a pretty popular book. I'd be surprised if you don't know about it, because not only was it popular when it first came out, but also it has gotten kind of a resurgence of popularity because this is a book about a pandemic. But if for some reason you don't know what this book is about, it is set 20 years after a flu pandemic has basically wiped out like 90% of the world's population, and it follows a group of people who make up the Traveling Symphony, which is a group of like actors and musicians that travel around like the northern United States and southern Canada and perform Shakespeare plays and music. And you're also following some characters kind of before the pandemic, and everything is kind of tied together, and as you read the book you kind of figure out how all of these characters are linked together. And it's one of my favorite books. It absolutely is one of my favorite books. It is just so expertly told. I think the way that she crafted the story just is expertly done. I said expertly twice, so I'm sorry, that's weird. I really love this book. It just brings out this feeling in me that no other book really ever has. I think that it's just a masterful piece of literature. That being said, on this reread, which this is I think my 3rd time reading the book. I read it initially and then I've read it twice since then. I don't know if it struck me quite as much as I was anticipating it would. I don't know if it's because we just have lived through a pandemic that this book hit a little bit differently for me. I still really love it, and I still would absolutely consider it one of my all-time favorite books. But would I consider it my all-time favorite book now? I don't know. I still really love it and I would highly recommend it. Cole and I are currently in the middle of watching the show that's on HBO Max. We're like 2 or 3 episodes in and I'm really enjoying the show. It's definitely different than the book and I think that the changes it made are necessary to adapt this type of story to the screen, but it is definitely different. I also decided to reread Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I decided to reread this book because I read another book that is often compared to this one and I really didn't enjoy it. Review of that one to come later on in the video, obviously. And it just made me want to like revisit Daisy Jones and just remind myself why I love it so much. If you don't know, this is about a band, Daisy Jones and the Six, and how they formed in the 60s and 70s and then what eventually led to them breaking up. And it's told in this kind of documentary style almost. The format of the story is that there is an interviewer interviewing all the people that were connected to this band and in this band during this time. And so the whole thing is basically just like interviews of all the people and the stories and everything. I really, really enjoy this book. I love it. It is one of my favorite books. I think Taylor Jenkins Reid is amazing and I will continue to read whatever she writes. I'm so excited for the show that's coming out, I think on Amazon Prime. I just cannot wait to see this book adapted for TV. I think it's going to turn into an amazing TV show. I think it's going to lend itself very well to adapting, and I cannot wait to like actually hear the music that they talk about in this book so often, because I feel like half of the story needs to come to life in the music. So I'm so excited. And if you haven't read Daisy Jones and the Six yet, I'd highly recommend doing so. And then lastly, the third book that I reread in January was another Taylor Jenkins Reid book actually, and that was After I Do. This is about a married couple, Lauren and Ryan. They've been married for a few years and their marriage has kind of gotten a little bit stale. They're on the brink of divorce, and to save their marriage, they decide that they're going to do a trial separation essentially for 1 year. They're going to live separately. They're going to not contact each other. After the year's up, they're going to come back together and decide that they either want to stay together or they want to get divorced. I don't know what made me want to reread this book. I was just like thinking about it one day, and then I was like, you know what, I'm gonna reread it. And so I checked it out from the library and I reread it. Let me just say, like, as a person who was not married when they initially read the book and who is married now, it really hit different this time. I loved it when I read it the first time. It really like struck me emotionally how much these characters obviously care for each other and how like desperate they are to try to fix whatever's between them, because I really do truly do believe that they're meant to be together. I understand kind of like what they've gone through. I loved it even more this time around, and I felt the desperation of the story so much more, and it was really great. It's not my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid book, but it definitely kind of maybe worked its way up the ranks a little bit on this reread. I really enjoyed it, and I am probably gonna reread more Taylor Jenkins Reid throughout the year because I love her as an author. She's someone that I would definitely consider to be a favorite author, and her stories just provide so much comfort for me. Really loved this. So glad that I revisited it, and can't wait to reread more and read whatever she puts out in the future. If you watched my goals video, how many times am I going to say that in this video? If you watched my goals video, you'll know that one of my goals is to read nonfiction more this year, to try to read one nonfiction book every single month. And so the one that I decided to pick up in January is You Never Forget Your First by Alexis Coe. This is a biography of George Washington. I had heard really great things about this for the last couple of years. Something I kept hearing was that it balanced like the historical facts with humor pretty well, and I don't know if that's true. I didn't really find this book to be like overly funny. There were definitely moments where the writing was like kind of humorous, but it wasn't like an outright like comedic story. This is just a pretty basic look at George Washington's life. The author really set out to tell the story of George Washington in a different lens, maybe. Something that she talked about in the intro of the book was that when you go and search out like a George Washington biography, a lot of times it focuses on his war career, and there's always like a picture of him on the cover of the book, like in his like military dress, or some of the more famous like military paintings of him. And she really wanted to focus more on his role prior to the war and his marriage to Martha, and then also as president, and then eventually after the presidency, and kind of like the different traditions and systems that he established in his various roles throughout the forming of the United States. I thought it was really a really good, like, concise introduction to the life of George Washington. I do feel like because the book is relatively short and because there is so much scope to George Washington's story, that at times it did feel a little bit incomplete, and it's definitely made me want to maybe eventually go on and read a more like extensive biography about George Washington. I didn't really know that much about him, to be honest, as someone who grew up in the United States and sat through many US history classes throughout high school and college. I felt like I should have known more about him than I did. And so learning a little bit more about him in this story definitely kind of like made me want to eventually read more and study more about George Washington. I do think this is a really great like introduction to who he is, and I thought it was a really well-written biography. Next up, I'm going to talk about 2 collections of short stories that I read. I do want to read more short stories this year, but I think that after reading 2 collections in January, I am like remembering why I don't totally love short story collections, and that's because they just don't always like fulfill the need I have for stories. So the first one I picked up was An Unrestored Woman by Shobha Rao. This is a collection of short stories all about women in India and Pakistan during and after and as a result of partition. Here in the first sentence of the author's note: in August 1947, the decline of the British Empire on the Indian subcontinent led to the formation of 2 sovereign states, India and Pakistan. The event, commonly known as partition, led to the establishment of Pakistan as an Islamic republic with a majority Muslim population, while India emerged as a secular state with a Hindu majority. This focuses on the female experience, largely on the female experience during and after and as a result of this event. There's 12 stories in this collection total, and they are paired. Each set of 2 stories is linked to each other in some way, whether it be the characters or the setting or the time period or whatever. And I thought it was really good. I definitely didn't know too much about this period in history, and I wish that wasn't the case. I wish I was a little bit more educated on more things, obviously. I thought this was a really beautifully written collection. It's hard to read at times. It's definitely a little bit more emotional, and there are some darker themes and topics discussed in this collection, but overall it's so hard to totally completely love a collection of short stories because there are going to be some hits, but every collection is going to have some misses. My favorite stories in this collection were probably The Merchant's Mistress. I also really liked The Opposite of Sex. Such a Mighty River was good. There's a few in here, but overall I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, but I am super interested to read more from Shobha Rao. I think that just given the writing style and just like how like beautifully told a lot of these stories are, I can imagine like a full-length novel of hers would be amazing. So I'm definitely going to be adding more books by her to my TBR. I really liked this, and I would recommend it if you're a fan of short story collections. It definitely is really good. It just wasn't my personal favorite. And the other collection of short stories I read, I feel like this is a super unpopular opinion because I've literally only seen like rave reviews for this collection, and that is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Filial. I, again, really liked this. This is a collection of short stories all about the secrets that women keep regarding, you know, family, religion, sexuality. It explores a lot of really interesting topics, and I think that there are a lot of great things about this collection. And again, if some of these were like longer full-length novels, I think that I would absolutely devour them. But as a collection of short stories, I didn't totally love this. I don't know that there's anything inherently wrong with any of them. I think that all of them have a message. I think that there's a point to every single story in this collection, and I think that you can get a lot from it. I think you can learn a lot from it. I just felt like there were multiple times while reading this, I just wanted a little bit more. It is what it is. I still like this. I definitely would recommend it. I totally understand why it's hyped, but I didn't love it as much as I wanted to. My favorite stories in this collection were Peach Cobbler. I also really liked Jael. Oh, and Snowfall. I really liked those 3. But yeah, I just don't think I'm ever going to completely love, like a 5-star read, a collection of short stories, unfortunately. Next up, I'm going to talk about like the sci-fi fantasy books that I read. I've read fantasy mostly, and then I read a sci-fi-ish story, and that is The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. It's very similar to Station 11 in that it follows different characters in different regions, areas, timelines, whatever, that are somehow connected to each other. The general gist of this story is all of these characters are in some way linked to a Ponzi scheme that happened in New York City. And the main character, kind of the main character of the story, the person we follow for the majority of the book, was married to the man who was like the one running it, basically. And I feel like that is such a weird description of the book because it's so much more than that. It really is just like this exploration of all these characters and how their lives were changed by this, but also how they're all linked to each other and kind of like the human experience. She does a really good job of making the world feel very small while also making the world feel very big. She also does a really good job of like bordering on the manic pixie dream girl trope while not fully going there. Every book that I've read by her kind of has that element of this character could become a manic pixie dream girl if we let her, but it doesn't quite go that far. I didn't like this as much as Station 11. Like it doesn't really hit the same. Like it's a completely different kind of story. Like the subject matter is completely different, but I did really enjoy it. The writing style is like that signature Emily St. John Mandel writing style. It definitely was captivating. Like I was invested in the story from start to finish. Even though I didn't necessarily always understand what was going on, I definitely was into the story and I wanted to know what was going to happen next. I say this is like light sci-fi because there is a little bit of a sci-fi element to it while not completely going there like all the way. It's definitely not as sci-fi as Station 11, which is like a full-on post-apocalyptic story, and it's not as sci-fi as, from what I understand, her new book is going to be, because I think that has a little bit more to do with like space travel, perhaps. I don't really know, but I did really enjoy it and I would recommend it if it sounds like something you might be interested in. The next book I'm going to talk about is actually the last book that I ended up reading in January, and that is Where the Drowned Girls Go by Shauna Maguire. This is book 7 in the Wayward Children series, which, if you don't know, the Wayward Children series is all about these kids who go to magical worlds. They go through a door at some point in their life, and then a lot of times they are sent back to our world, the real world, to help them kind of cope with coming back to a society that they don't love and feel familiar with anymore. They're sent to Eleanor West's home for wayward children. Each book kind of follows a different character. Some of them follow the characters while they're in their magical worlds, and some of them follow them in our world after they've come back and they've gone to Eleanor West's home for wayward children. And this book, the 7th book, largely follows Cora, who is a side character that has been in a couple of the other installments, but we've never gotten like her complete story. I feel like this is more like her story, although it isn't set in her magical world. It's set after she's come back and she is desperate to forget the events that have happened in some of the previous installments in the story. So she asks to be transferred to the other magical school, which is called Whitethorn Institute. It's vastly different from Eleanor West's school in that it's very much focused on trying to like re-ingratiate people into society and help them realize that what happened to them completely was nonsensical and all that. This series, I'm like, every book I'm like, okay, this is it. Like I'm done. Like I feel like that at this point it's getting a little bit too convoluted. The lore of the worlds doesn't make sense anymore. And then I read the next one and I'm like, I'm sucked back in. That kind of was the case for this one. I really enjoyed the 6th book that came out last year, and I felt like it was like a nice like revitalization of the series. And this one I feel like is opening up the scope of the world to be something even grander. The way this book ends definitely, I think, is going to set up for the possibility for even more stories in the future. And it was like a nice little breath of fresh air into the series that I feel like was getting pretty repetitive and stale. We were following a lot of the same characters that I was like not as interested in, and this one definitely opens up the scope of the world even more. And I know that for sure she has at least 3 more books in the series planned, and so I will probably just go ahead and complete the series and finish it off and figure out how it ends. I'm hooked back in. Like I will keep going, and I'm excited to see where she's going to take the series next. There's still a couple characters from like the original books that I'm desperate for their story, and I hope that we get those in the next few books, but I'm not holding my breath because now she's introduced even more characters, and I don't know. We'll see where it goes from here. I'm sure it's going to be a whimsical fun time no matter what happens next. Speaking of series continuations, another book that I read this month was Kingsbane by Claire Legrand. This is the 2nd book in the Imperium trilogy, the first book being Furyborn, which was my favorite book that I read in 2020. And I finally got around to reading the sequel, and it's a massive book. It took me a whole week to read this. I alternated between reading the book physically and then reading the audiobook, and I am so glad that I finally got around to reading the sequel to Furyborn because I really enjoyed this. I obviously can't talk too much about what Kingsbane is about, but if you don't know, Furyborn is about this fantasy world where, like, many years ago, there was this prophecy that said that 2 queens would rise, a blood queen and a sun queen. One of them would have the power to destroy the world, and the other one would have the power to save it. It follows 2 different characters in 2 different timelines who obviously are the blood queen and the sun queen, but it's not totally clear which is which. And I think that the beauty of the story is that both of them have the capability of being evil or being good, and it doesn't really confront good and evil in a black and white way. It really explores the idea that everybody has the capability of good and evil in them. I really like the series. I really like in general where the series is going. My problem with this book, and the reason I didn't enjoy it as much as the first book, is that it is entirely too long. There are some parts in here that definitely could have been cut out and the story could have remained the same. It gets a little bit repetitive in the middle. Also, it took a really long time for me to like really get reinvested in this story. I think it took me probably about the first 100 pages before I was like totally back in it and cared. Like I was on the verge of putting it down because I was like, I don't remember what I loved about the first book reading this one. And then it kind of like a switch flipped and I was back in it. I was totally sucked back in and I was so invested and I was ready to figure out how everything was going to play out. And I am so excited to see how the series is going to conclude. This was long and it did take me a long time, and like I said, I didn't love it as much as book one and I was not totally invested in it till about 100 pages in, but the end of this one, oh, it left off on such a big cliffhanger and I cannot wait to figure out what's going to happen next. I think I'm going to try to read book 3 in February or March. I'm going to try to read it soon because I want to read it while this story is still pretty fresh in my mind and I want to like knock off the series off my TBR. So I'm definitely planning on finishing it off soon, and I hope that I love how it ends. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Gilded Wolves by Roshni Chokshi. This is the first book in the Gilded Wolves trilogy, and this is a series that so often gets compared to Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo because it follows a ragtag group of characters and they are on like a mission. It's like a heist story. This is very different from Six of Crows, and I feel like it almost does this book a disservice to compare it to Six of Crows. That being said, I didn't totally love this. This is set in France in like the 1800s, and it follows this group of characters who are all seeking something out, and they decide to come together and they think that all of their problems can be solved by working together to complete this one mission. My issue with this book, I've written a Goodreads review, so I'll leave that linked down below because I've honestly kind of blocked out some of this book from my brain because I didn't really love it as much as I wanted to. My issue was that I didn't feel like I ever really got to know the characters fully. It's a large cast of characters and we read from each of their perspectives, but I never felt like totally invested in any of their stories, and I never really understood their motivations fully, and maybe that'll come more with like continuing on with the series, but at this point I haven't decided if I'm going to continue on with the series. I also didn't really totally love the writing style. I felt like there were moments where like, and this was almost true for every single chapter, was that we would like I would start reading a chapter and it would almost feel like I was dropped into the middle of a scene and I missed a crucial part of the story at some point. It was like, I don't know, we wouldn't necessarily always see the conversations, and I think the author was trying to keep the heist aspect of it, the mystery aspect of it, kind of a secret from the reader and do kind of like a reveal as the characters understand what's going on. I don't think she did a very good job of doing that because I definitely was more confused than I was invested in the story. I don't know, I didn't love it as much as I was hoping I would. I didn't love it as much as I kept like hearing how great it was. I just didn't understand why people love it so much. I don't think it necessarily deserves the hype it gets. So like I said, I haven't decided if I'm going to continue on with the series. I'd be really interested to know if the issues that I had with it are improved upon in later books in the series, so I can decide if I'm gonna keep going or not. But yeah, it didn't blow me away like I was hoping it would. So unfortunately, it just let me down. I'm sorry if the angle is a little different. I had to charge my camera battery for a little bit. So the next book I'm going to talk about is Songs in Ursa Major by Emma Brodie. This is a historical fiction book that often gets compared to Daisy Jones and the Six. This is the book that I was speaking about earlier when I was talking about why I decided to reread Daisy Jones. So essentially this is about a young singer. Her name is Jane Quinn, and she grew up on this island in like New England area of the United States. Another musician that's from this island is Jesse Reed, and he has become really big in like the folk rock music scene of the late 60s, early 70s. One night he is coming to play at the big music festival that they have on this island every year, and he gets into an accident, and Jane and her band are asked to step in as like the lead performers, and this kind of jumpstarts her career. And the book takes place over the course of several years, and it follows the rise and fall of Jane and her band and music and her relationship with Jesse Reed. And I didn't like this. I had heard such great things about it as it being so often compared compared to Daisy Jones and the Six, and honestly it was just like a knockoff version of Daisy Jones. It basically hits a lot of the same beats, a lot of the story structure is the same. It's told in like a regular like novel format as opposed to like the interview format that Daisy Jones is told in, but it does really hit a lot of the same things. One second Jane and Jesse meet each other, and then like the next second they're in love and they can't stay away from each other, and there was absolutely no foundation for their relationship. I didn't understand the motivations they had that kept like drawing them back to each other. There's like a couple of like plot twists, I'd say. There's like this mystery surrounding what happened to Jane's mom, and I didn't find it particularly like shocking when the twist was revealed. In fact, I felt like it was a little bit disrespectful the way it was all handled, because it has to do with mental illness and the way that mental illness was handled. And I understand like it's trying to be a book set in the 70s and mental illness wasn't something that was openly talked about in the 70s, but I feel like it just was done in a very like indelicate way that I didn't really appreciate. Also, there's a reveal about Jesse and why he is the way he is, and I didn't understand why that was a plot twist, considering the book is literally about rock stars set in the 70s. I just didn't like it, and after I finished it, literally all I wanted to do was reread Daisy Jones, because I was like, this kind of taints that book for me, like it being so often compared to Daisy Jones. It does Daisy Jones a complete disservice. This book was not good. It's very popular on Goodreads. Like it has a really great average rating and so many people seem to love it. I've seen a ton of 5-star reviews for it, and I just don't understand, because I did not enjoy it at all, and I would not recommend it, and I'm gonna unhaul it because it was just not the book for me, unfortunately. Next up, I'm going to talk about the 2 graphic novels that I read. I read volumes 3 and 4 of the Heartstopper graphic novel series by Alice Oseman. I started reading this series, I think at the very end of 2020, and my library just got the ebooks of the next volumes, and so I just checked them out and I read them back to back. This is a really like fun, sweet, happy graphic novel series about these 2 boys who go to high school in the United Kingdom, and they fall in love, and one of them suffered quite a bit when he came out as gay, and the other one is just like figuring out his sexuality. And so the series does focus quite a bit on how they navigate like telling their friends and how they navigate like being out to their school. It also tackles a lot of topics of like mental illness and eating disorders. There's a lot of trigger warnings. I would definitely like look up the trigger warnings if you're interested at all in the series. I do think it's a really fun, just like sweet, wholesome kind of series. I think if you need a little boost of serotonin, this is a really great series to check out, because the art style is great and the love story between the 2 main characters is great, and I like all the side characters as well. My problem with it is that, I mean, I understand why people love it, but I feel like it would mean more to me if I read it when I was younger. Like it's definitely geared towards a younger audience, and I know going into a story like this that I'm not the target audience, and that is totally fine, but it just feels like as the series keeps going, Alice Oseman is trying to hit a bunch of beats in terms of like what teenagers could experience in high school, and so it feels very like there's a moral to this story as opposed to just letting these characters exist in the world. So I don't know, I like it, it's fine, like it's sweet and cute, and I do enjoy it, and I will read the 5th volume, which is coming out later this year and I think is the final volume of the series, but I don't love it as much as a lot of people seem to. The very first book I ended up reading in 2022 was Hook, Line, and Sinker by Tessa Bailey. This is the sequel to It Happened One Summer, which I read right at the end of 2021. It was like one of the last, it might have been the last like novel that I read in 2021, and I never talked about it because I didn't post a December wrap up or a favorite books of 2021 video, but It Happened One Summer would have been on my favorite books of the year. This is the sequel that follows Hannah, who is a side character. She is the main character of the first book, Piper's younger sister, and this is her story and her romance with another side character we meet in the first book named Fox. This book doesn't come out until the beginning of March, so I hesitate to like go on and on and on about it. I was very fortunate to be able to get an advanced reader copy from NetGalley, and I'm so grateful that I was able to, because after I finished It Happened One Summer, Hook, Line, and Sinker immediately became like my most anticipated book. I really honestly never thought that I would give a Tessa Bailey book 5 stars, because I've read, not counting this series, I've read 4 books by her and I don't really love any of them. Oh man, this series is fantastic. Not only did she do a really great job of establishing believable, realistic relationships between these characters, but she also managed to tackle some really hard topics. Sometimes you read a book like this and knowing Tessa Bailey's reputation for writing like characters that are really great at dirty talk and like writing some of the best smut out there. You go into it thinking like it's just gonna be about the sex and nothing else. And sometimes that's great. Like sometimes that's exactly what I want to read a romance book for. And then It Happened One Summer just really really went above and beyond. Really great romance, really great smut, tackled really hard topics, had some really great conversations, and then to follow it up with Hook, Line, and Sinker, which did the exact same thing. It's probably one of my new like favorite romance duologies, series, whatever, that I've ever read. And it's a series that I can see myself returning to over and over because I just think that it was well written, well balanced. The characters were fantastic. The romances were so cute and swoon-worthy. Like I loved this series. If you were even contemplating picking up It Happened One Summer and then eventually the sequel, please do so. Like I love them. I love this series and I would highly recommend them, and I will probably reread them for many years to come because they just give me that little like boost of happiness that you need sometimes. And that leads us to the last book that I have to talk about for this video, and absolutely my favorite book that I read in January. A book that is probably going to be my favorite book of the year. Like I can't really imagine it not being at least in my top books of the year, and if it's not, then that means I'm gonna read some damn good books for the rest of the year because this was fantastic. And that is Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. This is on my 2022 TBR, my 5-star predictions, and if I could give this 6 stars, if I could give it 10 stars, I would. This book is about a bank robbery gone wrong that turns into an unexpected hostage situation. It sounds like a convoluted type of story, but really it's so much more than that. This book is about people just doing their best to live their lives and be as good of a person as they can be. These people are trying to be the best partner, sibling, child, parent, employee that they possibly can be. And it's all about how everybody's doing their best and nobody's getting it 100% perfect, but we're all just like trying our best to be the best version of ourselves. This is a classic example of reading a book at the exact perfect moment in time because I felt like I saw myself in it. So many of the moments in the story, I just was like, damn, like that, it hit me that I don't have to be perfect. Like I can do my best every day, and if it's not perfect, as long as I did my best, that's totally fine. I loved this book so much. I cried at the end of it. It's not even a particularly sad book. It hit me in all the places that I didn't expect it to, and I absolutely loved it. And I don't really know what else to say about it other than I would really highly recommend going and reading it. I can't promise that you'll get out of it what I got out of it because it really was just like the perfect book at the perfect moment for me, but I really hope that it can be that for someone else because it really just turned my whole perspective around. I want everybody to go read it and love it, and I can't wait to read more from Frederick Bachman. I don't know if I'll love any other book as much as I love this one, but this being like my first Frederick Bachman, I'm so excited to read more from him in the future because I really, really enjoyed this. I can't say any more good things about it. Like, it was fantastic and I loved it, and it's gonna be on my favorite books of the year list for sure. So those were the 15 books that I read in the month of January. It was such a great reading month. I'm so happy that I read the amount of books I did, that I read the amount of books that I loved that I did. I think that if this is any indication about how the year is gonna go, then it's gonna be one of my best reading years yet. And I don't want to speak too soon, obviously, but I think I'm overdue for a really great reading year, and I have so much hope going into the rest of the year. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video and what you thought about them. Do you have similar or different opinions to mine? I'd really love to know. Also, let me know some books that you read in the month of January, or maybe your favorite books that you read in January. I'd really love to know that as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!